Okay, hello chess players. In this video, I want to talk about this big misconception about exchanging pieces. And I hear it all the time. Anytime I go to like scholastic tournaments, I always have to just like stay silent every time I hear it because it's very, very prevalent. And it's something that gets shared as just like this common piece of wisdom and common knowledge. And it's just absolutely not, it's not even a rule. It's just kind of crazy. And that's when up material you should exchange. I hear this all the time. I hear this all the time. And of course, when you exchange pieces, it has nothing to do with how much or how little material you have. And I've got a perfect game to demonstrate that. I've got a perfect game to show that. It's a famous game. You can look it up in my 60 Round World Games. You can go over it and you can kind of add my comments kind of over the comments that have already been made about this game. Anyways, if you like content like this, want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button and click your notification icon. So there's this game, Walther versus Fischer, that was a Sicilian defense. Fischer was playing the black pieces. He played a Najdorf. And we had this super aggressive line in the Najdorf. It begins with bishop g5. This was played in Zurich back in 1959. We had e6, f4, and we go into this super topical, ridiculously aggressive line. Knight on b to d7 is probably a slight move order mistake. Probably queen c7 is better, but we'll forgive this. It was all played back in 1959. They didn't know if the move order mattered. So bishop d3, we have b5. We have bishop takes f6, knight f6. Then we have rook he1. We have bishop to b7. We have king to b1, rook c8, and I'm not going to do a deep theory dive right now. Basically, I'm just trying to get to the critical moment where white gets a pretty significant attack. We're going to have knight d7, g5, and now we're going to have this mistake. We're going to have knight b6. So Fischer needed to do something a little bit more aggressive to break out. Maybe, play something like b4, for instance. Probably would have been okay. Something like b4, and then say knight on c to e2, and then he follows up with knight c5, and, it's a playable game. Instead of that, he played knight b6, and then white just starts attacking really aggressively, beginning with f5. So we have f5, e5, and then we have f6. White has a massive advantage here. It's starting to climb. Like the advantage is starting to get really big. If you run this through Stockfish, from this point till quite a bit into the game, it gives white anywhere from like +2 to as much as +6 or 7 depending on the position. This is just a huge attack. So we have gf6, bishop f8. Now, what I want you to do is just understand why white's advantage is so big to begin with. It's because of how his pieces are positioned and how aggressively they are positioned, and how the black king has no way to get out of the middle, how it's very unclear how black is ever going to finish his development. Now, this has nothing to do with whatever the material is on the board. As a matter of fact, if I'm looking at this position for the first time, I'm not even doing a material count. I don't care. Now here's the thing. When I look at a position like this for black versus white, what I'm immediately thinking is every single piece that I can exchange as black gets me closer to not getting checkmated in the middle of the board. And that is how you should approach exchanges in chess. It is very clear that white has more space. More space is better if you have more pieces. You have more places to put those pieces. More space is bad if you have less pieces, like black. Look at how black's pieces are stepping on each other's toes. They don't have places to go. So every piece that I can get rid of relieves that problem, regardless of what the material is. And for white, every exchange should be sort of a calculated gesture. If we exchange pieces, we really want to be getting something out of it. So white's next move is really good. He plays knight d5. Now, this certainly offers an exchange of pieces, but it also opens up an attack against the black king. And it also makes this pawn shift position and advance more and opens up squares for the bishop. So he is exchanging pieces, but he's getting squares for it. So that's fine. So we have knight d5, we have knight takes d5, we have pawn takes d5. Now Fischer is playing the black pieces in this game. And keep in mind, Fischer actually saves this game, which is just impressive. Like if you look at this on the computer, there is no way black should be able to save this game. But he manages it, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So first we have king d8, and then we have another offer of an exchange, but again, to open up squares. So we have bishop c6, pawn captures c6, queen c6. Black offers an exchange of queens. Now here's the thing. You might be saying, of course, black offers an exchange of queens. This follows the rule I was always taught. We have, 6 pawns versus 5. So if I'm up material, I should exchange. And that has almost nothing to do with it. As a matter of fact, if white exchanges queens, the position is approximately level. White should not exchange queens for obvious reasons. White has more space and white is still attacking. And of course, the black king is in the middle of the board, and it's still not clear how white coordinates. And white would lose absolutely everything he just gained by opening up lines by exchanging queens. But again, the exchange has nothing to do with the material on the board. And in fact, the advantage would have very little to do with the material on the board if we made the exchange. White would still have an advantage, it would just be lesser. White wouldn't have an advantage as much if we exchanged queens, but the computer still gives very slight edge white upon a queen exchange. But bishop e4, by far and away the much better move. Queen c6 would be terrible in this position. We want to make sure black has a maximum number of pieces on the board with his king in the middle. So for the time being, black is up a pawn. And this has absolutely no bearing on whether black wants to exchange. Black wants to exchange, period. He has less space. You take 2 pawns and throw them off the board. Black still wants to exchange. And something like that does happen a little bit later. So spoiler alert. So anyway, so queen b6, and then we're going to have queen h5. These are really good moves from white. White is going to be going after this pawn, going after this pawn. White's getting his material back right away. This often happens in positions where you have more space and you have better attacking chances. The material's not as relevant as you might think because you're going to get that material back with your activity. So we have king c7, we have bishop f5, rook d8, queen f7 check, king b8. So now the material situation has changed. We have this really advanced pawn. We could potentially win this pawn right here. Hey, then we'd be up a pawn. So as soon as we win that pawn on h7, does white want to exchange? No. White does not want to exchange. If white exchanges in this position or any other position, his winning chances will immediately disappear. Like if you played like bishop takes h7 on the next move, and then he played something like queen c7, and we exchanged queens and we retreated our bishop, we would probably have a drawn position and not a winning position, even assuming we didn't lose this pawn. And that's just the for instance. So no, the material is not going to have any bearing on whether or not we want to exchange. And that's going to become more clear in a few more moves. So here we have queen e6. Very good move from Walther. He's maintaining his edge, maintaining his initiative. We have queen c7. Fischer wants to exchange queens badly. He's trying to put his queen in a position where maybe he can play queen c4. Maybe he can bring that queen to f7. Maybe if pawn f7, he can play queen e7, for example. He's trying to come up with some way to get some of these pieces off the board at some point. So we have rook e3, bishop h6, just desperate to connect the rooks, try anything he can. Rook c3, queen b7 gets played. Fischer just trying to find moves that aren't resignation, really. Pawn f7, very strong move. So pawn f7, and then we have bishop g7. Had to hold the bishop, had to do something. And now we have rook on c to d3. So this is where we start kind of losing the thread. This rook on c to d3 was a little bit of a mistake. What white should have done was just gone for the straightforward plan of continuing to ratchet up the pressure and gone for something like rook g3, bishop f8, and then simply play rook g8. And this is really difficult to stop. And this is just what you do when you have this type of overwhelming position. You just continue to maximize that advantage, create more threats, keep material on the board, make it very difficult for your opponent to do anything. So this would have been very, very strong. Instead, he continues with rook on c to d3. We have bishop f8. What else are we going to do? And then here's where I'm going to disagree with some annotations because the computer disagrees with it. But more importantly, I disagree with it. Queen e5. This has been annotated before and given an exclamation mark. And what it effectively does is it trades off a whole bunch of material and it wins a couple of pawns in the process. So you end up going into an endgame where white is going to basically be up 1 or 2 pawns, but this endgame is inherently less winnable than just doing something else. Like actually even just rook g3 right here is very, very strong. So like rook g3, queen e7, black's desperate to exchange queens himself, and we could simply play rook g8, and we could say, okay, exchange queens, but do it on my terms. We could have rook, queen takes e6, bishop e6, bishop h6, and then simply rook d6 is winning. They just have to resign. There's no saving this. This is just game over. I'm up way too much material here. You can't take where you're pinned. You take here, I take. I'm up a whole rook. This is resignation time. So no, don't exchange. Just keep building that attack. Play something like rook g3, rook g8. By the time that rook gets to g8, this is game over. But when you play queen e5, you've implied this massive exchange of material. So queen e5 takes, we have check, and then we have here. And then we had h5, and of course you're going to have to get your queen back. So now what's happened? Well, white's managed to get to this endgame where we have 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns for black, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns for white. So we did it. We did the magic trick. We exchanged everything while being up an extra pawn. So a lot of you are going, yes, this is what I was always taught. You get up material and you exchange. White managed to do it all at the same time. And it's a complete failure of what's going on in the position because now we are so much closer to a draw for black. A minute ago, black was getting mated, or this pawn on f7 was going to turn into a queen. Now there's a handful of endgames that we can get to potentially where maybe we tie. So we're getting closer and closer to that draw. All of a sudden, we can move pieces without having to resign. I mean, that's a big deal. So white continues. He plays c3. Then we have king c7, and then we have rook a8, which is a mistake. But guess what? He ends up winning a pawn in the process. King d6. Fischer gives him this pawn just to get some activity. He needs to get active with his pieces. Rook takes a6, and then king back to e7. He's going after this pawn. But look at this. White has this big material advantage, and look at all the pieces he's got off the board. So now we have 1, 2, 3 pawns versus 5. We're down effectively 2 pawns, and he stays down 2 pawns. That's spoiler alert. Fischer stays down 2 pawns for the remainder of the game and manages to save it. So we have rook to e6 check, king takes, rook takes pawn. I mean, look at this. 2 pawns left, and they're not even great pawns. How's he going to save this? We have b4 takes, bishop takes b4, and now it's just 2 clean passed pawns over here. The position's completely simplified. Queens are off the board. And yet, Fischer, playing the black pieces, is a hair's breadth away from getting a draw in this position. And that's because any rook exchange in this position is going to be very, very difficult to win with the white pieces. You're going to have an opposite colored bishop endgame, and even with 2 connected passed pawns, not all of those endgames are going to be wins. So now suddenly we have a path to potentially get to a draw with just one more exchange. So here we have h3 and we have king f6. Another thing to keep in mind is do not ever underestimate activity. At this point, black's position is actually more active than white's, even though white is clearly still got a winning advantage. Like, there's no reason white shouldn't still win this position with 2 connected passed pawns. It's just the path to winning this position has gotten infinitely more difficult than it was just a couple moves ago. So we have rook b5, bishop to d6, bishop to e4, and then we have rook e8 hitting that bishop again, and again, just remaining active, creating threats. We have rook f5 check, king back to g7, bishop f3, rook e1 check, king to c2, rook f1, again, just creating a pin, creating problems. How are you going to solve these problems? So then we have rook to d5, rook f2 check, rook d2, and Fischer jumps at the exchange like, wait a minute, he's down 2 pawns. Why in the world would you want to exchange rooks? I mean, it's pretty obvious why he wants to exchange rooks. He exchanges rooks and not bishops, of course. He could play rook takes bishop, and then he could win this pawn. So he's actually offering to exchange rooks and not win a pawn, which would be a lost endgame, versus exchanging rooks where he has some chances to draw. And that's the thing, is the material should never be the consideration in determining an exchange, because here obviously black can win material. He can play rook f3. He can have this continuation. We can have rook f3, rook d6, rook h3, a4, completely winning for white. It's total insanity. You have no chance. You're never going to win this race. He has 2 connected passed pawns. You have 1. He could even sacrifice the rook for the pawn and just queen with 2 pawns on the 6th. The king is too far away to do anything. So it's always going to be about the initiative, about the activity, about who has more space, who has better pieces, which endgames are wins, which endgames are draws, where's your drawing chances. So rook d2, he has some drawing chances, but keep in mind, white's probably still winning. So it's not until a few moves later, like he plays h4, gets that pawn on a dark square, he's got that covered. He's activating his king, just trying stuff. Now, at any point in here, white probably had a win if he played really, really carefully. But after king d7, he makes the mistake of playing a4. And amazingly, even though a4 doesn't look like a mistake, like b4 was correct, should have played b4, and then apparently white's winning. But again, this is a really tricky endgame. It's not so simple to play this and not get a draw. A4 was incorrect, and then Fischer finds, the continuation because he's Fischer. King c7, b4, and then we have king b8, a5, king a7. He's covering the dark squares, and then he makes it very difficult for white to not place his pawns in a way that allows a blockade. And this is what you do when you have opposite colored bishops. So we have king to b3, and again a mistake. We have king to b3, and then we have bishop e1, king a4, bishop d2, and you're just not going to be able to make this work. So bishop to b2, bishop h5, bishop e1, b5, bishop back to f2, and then here's the point, is this pawn can't ever queen, even if you win this one. So if, for example, b6, we could simply take it. And again, it just comes back to which endgames are won, which endgames are drawn. b6, we could simply play bishop takes b6, takes. This pawn and this bishop with this corner cannot make a queen. All we have to do is run back to that corner. Even if white wins that pawn and has a 4-point advantage, that position is a draw. You cannot kick the king out of the dark squared corner without stalemate. Therefore, that's a draw. So you've pushed it all the way to the end where you're up 4 points. And I hear this all the time. When up material exchange, because when you get to the end, fractionally you have an advantage. 4-1, that's a huge fraction. You're drawn. The fraction has nothing to do with it. It's all about position. It's all about which endgames are wins, which endgames are draws. It's all about activity. It's all about piece placement. And generally speaking, when you have a big space advantage, big initiative, big attack, you don't want to exchange pieces. And of course, if you're in the opposite situation where you're getting attacked, you don't have initiative, and you have a big disadvantage in space, you do want to exchange pieces. And that's the rule on whether or not you should exchange pieces. And of course, that's what Fischer did in this game, and he managed to get a draw. And that's just how this type of stuff works. So he managed to get a very difficult draw in a game that honestly should have ended somewhere in the middle game with rook g3, rook g8, as I showed in the notes. And that's just the way this game should have gone. Anyways, I hope that you learned something new about chess. I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.